Now I need to warn you. What you're about to hear is not just disturbing, it's violating. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. This isn't about food. It's about obedience, about ritual, and about a woman who built an empire teaching others to love themselves while feeding on those who gave her everything. Oprah Winfrey is not who you think she is. You see a mentor, a mogul, a mother to millions, but at her estate, there are no clocks, no mirrors, only silence and instructions. She told me to eat. And when I refused, she smiled because she knew something I didn't. Eventually, we all will too. The kitchen was chaos, but it was mine. Steam burst from the sauté line like applause. Ticket printers screamed red ink in bursts, drowning in the rhythm of blades through herbs and the hiss of oil hitting steel. People think fine dining is elegant. It's not. It's burns that never heal right. It's 12-hour shifts standing in place and the constant background fear that your mise is 2 steps behind. But for me, food made sense when nothing else did. I was in the middle of plating seared grouper when the memory hit me. Lemon rice, the way my mother used to make it. She was still fighting back then. I cooked it for her the night before her second surgery. Too much mustard seed, too little oil. She smiled anyway. She said it was the only thing that still tasted like home. I blinked it away. Grouper foam, charred okra, wiped the plate, send. I turned to grab the next ticket and froze. He was already standing there. Charcoal gray suit, no apron, no clipboard, no delivery crate. Just there, clean, unblinking. His shoes weren't wet. No one gets through the dish pit dry. Chef Missouri, he said, like it wasn't a question. I didn't answer. You've been recommended, he continued. We have a short-term opportunity. Private event, intimate, controlled. He handed me a folder. Inside, an NDA with 3 lines highlighted. $15,000 flat rate compliance training, required deviation is grounds for removal. And one final sentence underlined in red. You are not preparing food. You are preparing presence. I looked up. He was already holding a key card and a phone. You'll be compensated before departure, he said. Transport is waiting. I asked when. He smiled. Now. The black car didn't make a sound. Even the tires seemed to glide over Miami pavement like it had somewhere more important to be. The driver wore white gloves and didn't speak. When I checked the screen of the prepaid phone he gave me, it only displayed 1 line of text. Oprah, private dinner sequence. I knew about Diddy's white parties. Everyone did. But this was different. No crowds, no DJs, no secrecy layered in champagne. This was exclusive, hidden, controlled. The flight was quiet. There were no windows. The jet was curved and cold inside, like it had been carved from a pearl. On the tray near my seat was a blank envelope. I opened it. Inside was a small metallic room key and a strip of paper. Do not open the kitchen doors until the sound stops. The estate sat at the top of a private hill, the kind of place where the trees felt posed, too symmetrical, like a painting trying to remember nature. The gravel wasn't gray, it was white. White stone, white walls, white steel gate. The front door opened before I could knock. The woman who greeted me was tall, slim, ageless. No expression, no name. Just gloves so spotless they looked painted on. I am assistant to the host, she said. Follow closely. The inside felt like a museum curated by someone who hated color. Not cold, not warm, just muted. The walls weren't painted, they were bleached. The floor absorbed every footstep like it was swallowing sound. No clocks, no windows, no smell, no time. She led me down a hallway to the kitchen, a room that gleamed like a surgical theater. Everything stainless, everything spotless, no stove burners, no flame. The ceiling lights buzzed with a tone I couldn't place. Knives are forbidden, she said as if I had asked. Precision is provided. Emotion is portioned. She opened a drawer. Inside were vacuum-sealed pouches. Each was labeled not with ingredients, but with emotions. Warmth, regret, stillness, submission. I reached for the last one, and the moment my fingers grazed it, it trembled. Only slightly, but it vibrated like it was breathing. "There are no improvisations here," she said. "You will assemble, not create." I nodded, but something in my chest tightened. Like I'd just signed something with my body I hadn't read with my eyes. Later, when she left, I wandered the space. I noticed things I wasn't supposed to. There was a faint spiral pattern on the pantry floor, almost invisible unless the light hit it right. A white glove folded perfectly inside a drawer no one told me to open. A bell carved into the ceiling molding above the prep line. Not hung, not wired, just engraved there like a reminder only the house remembered. Hours passed, or minutes, or days. There were no windows, no clocks. The lights never changed. Then suddenly, the kitchen hummed. Not the way machines hum. Not mechanical. It was more like pressure in the air, like a sound too low to hear, but still inside your bones. I turned. Someone was standing just beyond the doorframe. A figure, robed in white, no shoes, no sound. They stepped forward and knelt, poured salt in a perfect spiral on the floor. Their fingers moved with ritual, not rhythm. Then they looked up. I couldn't see their eyes, just the soft movement of their mouth. When she enters, place the sugar backwards, and then they were gone. I didn't sleep. There was no bed, no clock, no time. Just the kitchen, always lit, always clean, always waiting. The drawers reset themselves. The pouches refilled. Even the air stayed the same temperature, like the room didn't breathe unless she allowed it. Sometime between my third and fourth meal prep, a paper menu slid under the door. It wasn't a standard layout. There were no portions, no ingredients, no instructions, just sensations. Purity foam, memory reduction, soup mirror dish. The final offering, TBD. Below the list was one line written in red ink. Do not serve taste, serve surrender. I didn't know what that meant, but the pouches on the counter were different that morning. The labels had changed. Obedience, hunger, shame cleansing, desire. And one unlabeled pouch with a seal I had never seen. No logo, just a symbol, a spiral, pressed faintly into the plastic like a fingerprint. I began to work. There was no heat, no open flame, no chopping. Everything was pre-prepped, sealed, powdered, humming with intent. I followed the ritual. Fold, layer, smear, swirl. Every motion felt like a prayer I hadn't learned, but somehow remembered. I was assembling food, not cooking it. Like I wasn't making dishes. I was waking something up. I reached into the refrigeration drawer for garnish and found a photo. It wasn't mine. It wasn't labeled. It showed the assistant, the same ageless woman who'd greeted me, smiling next to a young girl in a white robe, her hair pressed into tight curls, her eyes blank and wide. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "She's ready for dessert." The assistant reappeared at 6 p.m., not because I saw a clock, but because that's when my body told me it was time. She placed a cloth in front of me and said flatly, "Tonight's meal is for her guests. She will enter last." "Who's she?" I asked. But she was already gone. The dining hall was unlike the rest of the estate. Where the kitchen was clinical, this room was ceremonial, circular, ceiling domed and dark. No chairs, just cushions arranged in a spiral on the marble floor, each one facing a single mirror suspended from the ceiling by wires. There were no place settings, just black cloth mats with symbols stitched in silver, spirals, bells, open palms. The first guests arrived in silence. All wore white, no shoes, no jewelry. Each held their hands open, palms up like they were waiting for something to be placed inside. None of them spoke. I served purity foam first. It hissed as it hit the mats. One guest began to cry before tasting it. Another stared at it, eyes full of something like guilt. When I brought out the memory reduction soup, One guest dipped their finger into the bowl, touched it to their forehead, and began to laugh. Not joy, not hysteria, just emptiness. Then came the mirror dish. I didn't know what it was. The ingredients were familiar but refused to sit still. The surface shimmered like water, but it was dense like custard. It smelled like a birthday you didn't show up to, like a song you heard playing in a nightmare. When I brought it out, the room went still. That's when she arrived. Oprah, not dressed as herself, dressed as an idea, pure white, robe flowing behind her like fog. No expression, no footsteps. She glided. She didn't sit. She just stood. Her guests lowered their heads. Some whispered things I couldn't hear. She raised her hand. Everyone exhaled together. I moved toward her, plate in hand, unsure where to place it. And that's when I looked up. The mirrors. None of them reflected the guests. They only reflected me. But not me in that moment. They showed me seated where the guests were, one by one. I watched myself reach for food, chew slowly, cry, beg. At the center mirror, I saw myself holding a spoon. My mouth was open. Something was feeding me. I dropped the plate. It hit the marble but didn't break. It didn't even make a sound. The assistant appeared instantly, lifting it back up, pressing it into my hands. "Present it," she said, with stillness. When I turned back around, Oprah was smiling. Not with warmth, but with certainty, like she already knew I'd obey. The final dish was left unserved. On the tray was the unlabeled pouch, the one with the spiral. I unsealed it and felt something shift in the air. The light flickered. I don't remember cooking it. I only remember watching it assemble itself. When the dinner ended, the guests filed out in reverse order. No applause, no thanks, no conversation. They walked backwards from the table, palms up, heads low. Oprah was the last to leave. She turned to me, held out her hand, and whispered, "He's ready." Later, back in the kitchen, I noticed something had changed. The glove in the drawer was gone. The spiral on the pantry floor had grown. It stretched now to the prep counter, and sitting next to my cutting board was a small note. "Tomorrow you'll handle the leftovers." If there was a night, it never came. The light in the kitchen never shut off. I didn't sleep. I don't think I even blinked. When I looked down at the counter again, a new pouch had appeared. Vacuum sealed like the others. But this one was labeled by hand. Completion. The handwriting was beautiful, almost devotional. My glove slid on like second skin. The silence in the kitchen felt heavier now, like it was waiting for me to break something sacred. I opened the pouch and began prepping the dish. Folded garnish, aromatic mist, a silky puree with the color of dead rose petals. It should have felt like any other meal I'd prepped since I got here. But this one felt like a ritual. A soft click pulled my eyes toward the pantry. A section of the wall, previously seamless, slid open with no sound. 3 men stepped out, dressed in black suits, crisp, tailored, white gloves, no words, no eye contact, not a single breath wasted on my presence. Each carried a tray, long stainless steel, covered with a chrome lid. They moved with unnatural fluidity, like this wasn't the first time they'd walked this path, like it wouldn't be the last. They placed the trays in a perfect row in front of me, then lifted the lid simultaneously. Raw meat. Each tray held a different cut, but none of them resembled anything I could name. Not beef, not lamb, not anything I'd ever worked with. No labels, only symbols etched into the corners of the trays. Spirals, crescents, something like an open mouth. The smell was wrong, not spoiled, not rancid, just off, like a memory soaked in blood. The second tray contained a cut that looked almost like ribeye, but the muscle striations were too symmetrical, like it had been designed, not grown. The third tray stopped my breath, a deep red strip of meat. It twitched, just once, a spasm, barely visible. I blinked. It was still. They placed a bone-handled slicer beside the trays, a set of sterile bone scissors, and a polished silver bowl labeled "Finish with Reverence." Then, without a single word, they turned and walked back toward the pantry. I followed them with my eyes and saw where they disappeared, a recessed panel just behind the shelf, a doorway disguised as architecture. They vanished like they were never there. I stared at the wall, then the meat, then the wall again. And against every screaming instinct in my chest, I followed. The panel opened with the gentlest push. Behind it, a narrow corridor, walls pulsing with faint warmth. The air was damp and smelled like burnt sugar and wet copper. The floor was stone, not tile. The light bulbs buzzed in a failing strobe. At the end of the corridor, a door. I opened it and stepped into a room that didn't belong in this century. A kitchen, older than memory. Brick oven, meat hooks, iron pans swinging from rusted nails. But everything here was dead. Counters crusted with dried fluids. Butcher blocks grooved deep with violent scars. And the smell was hate. It coiled up my nostrils and slid behind my eyes. Sweet and sour, metallic, and beneath it all, something alive. Flies buzzed thick in the corners. A cleaver was stuck in the wall like someone had thrown it, not used it. There were stains shaped like footprints. Knees. A humming vibration crawled through the floor and into my spine. I turned toward the source. A freezer at the back of the room. Industrial. Humming like a song I wasn't supposed to hear. The door was half open. I walked toward it. Inside, hanging loosely from a meat hook. A leg, not wrapped like commercial meat. No tags, no markings. Just pale, smooth flesh. And a small white sock still clinging to the foot like it hadn't gotten the message. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just turned and ran. Stumbling through the corridor, shoulders scraping the walls that now felt too close, too hot. The humming followed me, in my chest, in my ears, as if something had been awakened. When I burst back into the main kitchen, I couldn't breathe, but I froze anyway, because she was there, Oprah, waiting at my station, still, serene, like a statue of something people once worshipped before fire was invented. In her hands, a plate, and on that plate, the meat I was supposed to slice, perfectly cut, perfectly seared. The smell hit me like a brick. It was the same smell as the room below, but now polished, masked, dressed in rosemary and lemon oil. She didn't speak, not at first. She just watched me, smiling, her eyes wide and peaceful, like she was watching the tide come in after winning a war. Finally, she said, "You don't have to cook it." She stepped forward, gently pushing the plate toward me. "You just have to taste." The meat was still warm. I hadn't touched it. I never cooked it. But there it sat, buttered garlic, melting into tender folds, rosemary sprigs like delicate arms reaching toward the edges of the plate. It smelled like home, like lemon rice on a Sunday, like the last good thing I ever tasted with my mother. And Oprah was watching. She stood across from me, still, elegant, ageless. Her expression calm, but it was the kind of calm you'd find before a wildfire, too perfect, too composed. She didn't speak, just waited. The silence was thick enough to chew. Then she said gently, "My first friend taught me how to actually eat. It wasn't by force, so I don't." She stepped closer. "I like when they choose me." Her voice was warm, but something behind it was vibrating. A low, ancient hum that curled into my spine like a claw. "They always do." I tried to speak, but my mouth stayed shut. My hand moved, not fast, not slow, like it was obeying something buried deep in me. I picked up the fork. "Are you ready to choose me?" she asked, voice soft as linen. I stared at her. "You choose me," she said, "by doing one thing." Her eyes didn't blink. "Eat." I brought the fork to the plate, speared a thin slice. It trembled, or I did. I couldn't tell anymore. The smell wrapped around my head like steam, like memory. I lifted it, closer, inch by inch. The room darkened at the edges. The sound vanished. All I could hear was her breath. Then, her face changed. The skin flickered like a bad feed. Her eyes deepened, bottomless black. Her smile cracked wider than it should have. Her teeth too many, too sharp. She shimmered, pixelated, demonic. Something ancient looked back at me through that face, and I dropped the fork. It clattered onto the plate, echoing like a gunshot. I stepped back. "I can't," I said, voice raw. Oprah didn't react. Not with anger, not with disappointment. She just watched me. And then she smiled. But this time it wasn't warm. It was cold, like a glacier cracking beneath your feet. "I'm not like Diddy," she whispered. "He forces his will." She tilted her head, eyes locked on mine. "I don't need to, I just wait." A beat of silence. "They always choose me, eventually." She stepped backward, melting into the shadows like a ghost dissolving into wallpaper. And suddenly, I could breathe again. I didn't pack. I didn't change. I just ran, grabbed my duffel, shoved the door open. The corridor to the garden was glowing in moonlight, finally visible. But I wasn't alone. As I reached for the door, he was there. Diddy, wearing a black robe, white cuffs, standing like he'd been there the whole time. His expression was unreadable, not angry, not amused, just heavy. Like the weight of something that had waited too long, we stared at each other. Time didn't move. Then, a smile. Small, mechanical. "Have a good night, chef." He stepped aside, letting me pass, like I had a choice. The outside air hit like ice. The estate behind me loomed too perfectly, its windows like eyes, watching, calculating. The garden was silent, no crickets, no breeze. A black SUV waited at the edge of the path, no driver in sight until I stepped closer. Then the door unlocked with a click. I got in, sank into the leather, didn't speak. The driver didn't look at me, didn't ask questions. The flight was the same. Private, silent, the same seat, same folded blanket, same untouched glass of ginger ale on the tray beside me. The room key was still in my pocket. I threw it in the trash at baggage claim, back in Miami. But it didn't feel like Miami. It didn't feel like anything. I walked through my own apartment like a stranger. The walls were thinner, the floor too loud. I tried cooking the next day. Lemon rice, just like I used to. I followed every step, every detail. But when I tasted it, it was copper, metallic, office wrong. I dumped the whole pot down the sink. That night, I heard a hum in my kitchen, software low. It was probably the fridge. Probably. But when I opened the pantry door the next morning, I saw it, etched faintly into the wood beneath a bag of flour, a spiral, drawn in what looked like ash. A week later, I got a package. No name, no return address, just a plain envelope with no postage. Inside was a Polaroid. I stared at it for 5 minutes before I could breathe. It was me, standing in the underground kitchen, mouth open like I was about to speak, eyes wide, confused, caught. In the background, blurry in the shadows. Someone was standing behind me, wearing a white glove, holding a dinner bell. I never told anyone, I never will. But some nights, I hear that hum again, and I swear I can still smell the rosemary. I don't know if it's in my head, or if the spiral never really let me go, but I remember what she said, and I believe it now. They always choose me, eventually.